I just took a like a shot of pre-workout to try and revive my emotion because I just finished reading this and I feel dead inside. There's a reason that I have read Catching Fire and The Hunger Games like probably 5 times a piece, and this is my 3rd reread of this one. But my goal was to reread the whole trilogy before going into the new book, Sunrise on the Reaping, which releases in 2 days. It's so exciting. But that meant that I had to relive this book, and I've seen the movies of this book a lot of times, like many, many times. And I was like, you know what, I can handle it. Per usual, I was wrong. And so, like, my goal going through rereading this time was to keep a special eye out for Haymitch, since he is the main character of the next book, and also to kind of keep a lookout for differences between the books and the movies, because I feel like a lot of us fall in the same camp where we've seen the movie so many times that really, when we're thinking through the plot of the Hunger Games trilogy, a lot of the time what pops up for us is the stuff that's in the movies. And I thought, you know, there were 2 movies for this one tiny book. What could they have possibly missed? Do you see the amount of tabs in here? This is probably better representation. Oh my gosh. For reference, this is how many there were for Catching Fire. This video is going to be long, so buckle yourself in. If you have not read The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay, it is your time to exit. Don't let what I said scare you away. It's worth the pain. Goodbye to non-spoiler people. Okay, since you have seen the amount of tabs that we need to get through, I'm really going to try and rapid fire my way through these. First, we come back to Katniss Everdeen in District 12, kind of waking up from the ordeal of being pulled from the capital, and now she is in District 13. We find out that it has been so bad that 13 has put her on a pretty serious medication regimen just to control her mood and the pain that she still has from the aftermath of the 75th. But they're to the extent that she's seeing things. This is something we don't see in the movie. Normally, I think when we open up with her, the opening of Mockingjay is her saying her thing, right? Where she's like, my name is Katniss Everdeen, I'm 17 years old. Yeah, because then she starts talking about Peeta and can't finish her thought process. So we know that she's bad off, but in this book, it just seemed like so much worse than what the movie portrayed at the beginning. And also, we have her go down into 12 like right away. So she's walking through the corpses of her people. And I talked about this a bit in the Hunger Games and Catching Fire videos that I've done, is that we don't get to see, obviously, Katniss's inner monologue, and outwardly she's very stoic. So even though Jennifer Lawrence has much of like a walled-off, emotionless look to her in these scenes, which is what she's supposed to do, inwardly, we don't realize how dark it is inside of Katniss's mind during this book, especially when she's walking through these bodies. She's looking at them individually and thinking, I killed you and you and you, because she thinks it's her fault that 12 got bombed. To an extent, I would not say it's her fault. I would say it's in retaliation to the rebellion. I don't think Snow would be against bombing 12 just to kind of get back at Katniss, but overall, I wouldn't say it's her fault, but she really is taking the responsibility for everything that's happened to 12, which is just a massive burden to bear. It's so upsetting when she's talking about Finnick. Finnick, in the movies, we see that he's kind of mentally undone. Like, he's not okay. But in this book, when she's talking about Finnick, first of all, we don't really see her take a long time to need to forgive Finnick, because even though Katniss knows that Finnick had a part in the rebellion before they went into the arena, she's like, it's really hard to stay mad at someone who cries that much. And that's just, I mean, it's so upsetting. Like, to hear not only her mental state, but how bad Finnick has it right now. Because as we see later, he already is aware of how President Snow is going to be using Annie against him, and in turn Peeta against Katniss, but Katniss has not fully realized it yet. How creepy is it that when Katniss goes back into her house, she finds the rose that President Snow has left for her. In, like, on her dresser, there's all these dead roses, and then there's the one live one in the middle. Are you joking? Like, I feel like, to an extent, obviously poison is Snow's weapon of choice, but even further, I think it's like psychological warfare, because on top of, you know, the twisted pods and things that we encounter in this book, everything is designed in the capital to mentally incapacitate their enemies as well. Like, they don't just want people dead, they want them destroyed in a way that's even deeper than physical, because that's almost scarier. Because like Finnick says, it's it's even like harder. He wishes they were all dead because what they're going through and what they're going to go through is way worse than death as far as like their fate goes. And so it's really upsetting to get to that midway point in the book where we really realize that and to understand that Finnick has been dealing with that the entire time. Bonnie and Twill didn't make it. Katniss asks about them at District 13 and they say they've never heard of them. And I mean, the main conclusion is that they probably just died in the woods. So we understand why District 13 was basically spared. Like, yes, their entire, district was blown up, but they are mostly an underground district because they were the nuclear weapons development district. And so for them, when they were going up against the Capitol almost had to accept their deal of allowing District 13 to play dead. And the idea is that the Capitol believed that they would die off on their own because their numbers were going to be so low and they weren't really able to use the ground level of their district. But you gotta know that was probably haunting Snow for almost his entire presidency. Or whoever was before him would have had to have told him, hey, just so you know, District 13 isn't actually gone. It's just kind of out there mysteriously, maybe alive. And can you imagine him coming into power after experiencing his relationship with Lucy Gray and not knowing if she's actually out there or actually dead, and now you have a whole district that is the same vibe. Can you imagine? So one of my favorite parts of doing a reread for the whole trilogy is seeing this extra spark in Peeta that does not exist in the movies, because his main characteristic is kindness. And he's such a foil to Katniss, who is just like, she's not mean, but she is very blunt, and she doesn't put a huge stake on her own emotions or how she comes across to people. Like, for her, it doesn't matter if people like her. She doesn't care. And so she's not kind because of it. Like, she cares about people, but not necessarily their opinion of her. And whereas Peeta, he really wants other people to feel welcomed by him. So when we go into the books and we see that characteristic, but we also see this extra little bit of an edge to him that I just absolutely love. And we see it a lot more in this book, a little bit more of that sharpness. We also know he's going to be tortured in the Capitol. So he's also kind of becoming a little unhinged. And when Caesar is interviewing him, Katniss blew it out. Peeta says, Caesar, you've seen the footage. So they're talking about the arena. She didn't know what she was doing. None of us could follow BT's plan. You can see her trying to figure out what to do with that wire. Peeta snaps back. All right, it just looks suspicious, as if she was part of the rebels' plan all along. At this point, Peeta he's sitting, but he gets on his feet, leans into Caesar's face, hands locked on the arms of his interviewer's chair. Really? And was it part of her plan for Joanna to nearly kill her? And he's yelling. Like, I really like to see that from Peeta, because like so much of the time he's so controlled, which I think is a good quality for him. But when he has this moment, we see that he's still very much on Katniss's side. Can you imagine being Haymitch though? Because while we're watching this interview, then Caesar asks about Haymitch, because Peeta's so adamant that Katniss knew nothing. He's like, what about Haymitch? And Peeta's like, I don't know what he knew. And the only thing I know is that I should have never trusted him. Can you imagine how Haymitch feels? These are basically his children at this point. Like, the way he cares about them and is like in almost a parental figure for them. You know what's absolutely horrible? I feel like when they're talking about like how they should present Gale, Coin asks Katniss, they're like, do you want us to present him as your new lover? She's 17 years old. And then Plutarch is like, we should continue the current romance. A quick defection from Peeta could cause the audience to lose sympathy for her, especially since they think she's pregnant with his child. The way they're just so calculating specifically about this part of her life, like she's like a baby. This is like so unfair, and I think that's a big part of it, is like, see how all of it is for show. Like, they're down to calculating who people think she has a crush on for optics when it comes to the rebellion. When Katniss agrees to be the Mockingjay, she finally is like given all of the drawings that Cinna made for her. This, to Katniss, is a confirmation that she's made the right choice, because she really respects Cinna's opinion and what he would have wanted. And it's clear Cinna wanted her to become the Mockingjay because of how much care he's put into this costume. And so she gets the drawings, and we go to the last page and it says, I'm still betting on you. I kind of hate... So now that I have seen the movie so many times, Gale is the one that says, you're going to be the best dressed rebel in history. I cannot believe I forgot that Effie is not in this book, like, at all, until the end. I am so used to Effie being, like, integral part of this story, because I'm just saying Francis Lawrence looked over and was like, we have Elizabeth Banks at our disposal. We're not cutting her out of the entire third movie and most of the fourth one. And I think that was the right decision for the movies, because like there's so many extra characters in this book that aren't necessarily, this sounds horrible, they're not necessarily like needed. Not that, I don't think it was like wrong for Suzanne Collins to use these characters. I think it's more realistic in the book. I don't think Effie Trinket overall as a character, she's obviously like not happy to be part of the rebellion in the movie, but it's not like she resists it, where I feel like what we're supposed to take from Effie's character in the books especially is that she loves Katniss and she cares about her and Peeta, but she's sort of complacent in the capital because of the privilege it affords her. And so I think that's what we're really supposed to take from Effie's character. Like, she is loyal to an extent. It's not like, it doesn't seem like she really goes looking, you know, to try and help Katniss and Peeta after this. But now there's all these lines that I hear in Effie's voice, but they're not Effie. I also forgot that the prep team gets kidnapped and taken to 13. So we're supposed to go with Plutarch to get back to beauty base level 0 or whatever it is. And we go downstairs and we hear like this whimpering behind a door, and Katniss and Gale, first of all, I love how they're able to communicate without words. It's very similar to how she operates with Haymitch, but there's even more history there. And so Gale kind of distracts the guards so she can get into this room where she finds her prep team has been like locked up and basically tortured. They're shackled to a wall. Like, it's so horrible. And then Katniss immediately tries to go over and start comforting them, and her prep team is sort of like flinching away from her because they see her as part of the group that locked her up. And it's very depressing, and it shows us immediately how in District 13 and to an extension Coin really believes in the idea that like nothing is off limits if it's going to accomplish our goal. We're supposed to believe that District 13 is the perfect answer to the Capitol, like the cruelness of the Capitol, and now 13 and Coin are going to come in and usher in this great new era, but at the same time, she's not above torturing pretty innocent people, because like we've established previously, like, yes, the prep team is capital, and they don't necessarily like think critically about what's going on in the Hunger Games, and they're excited about the games and stuff like that, but they're not bad people. And I think that is a huge emphasis in this book, is how much of Panem's population falls in this in-between state of they're not guiltless, but they're also not bad people. And I think a big part of the theme that Suzanne Collins has put in here is that pretty much everyone falls in that gray area, and where you fall along in that, you know, gradient is everybody puts their line in a different place. And that's something we see with Gale over and over again, is he puts his line way further than Katniss would. And does that necessarily make Gale a bad person? Because they are in a war and you sometimes need that brutality. But I don't know, I think us seeing so many different characters, like there feels like there's a lot of people in this book, but us seeing that many different people is important because we see people fall so differently along that line. And I feel like that's a much more realistic portrayal of like a society and a war, as opposed to just having the good side and the bad side. And Katniss isn't like blinded to really any of that, because she's then talking to Plutarch and Fulvia, who's Plutarch's right hand essentially, and she's like, just so you know, the way that Coin is allowing this prep team to be treated is, you know, a message. Punishing my prep team's a warning, I tell her, not just to me, but to you too, about who's really in control and what happens if she's not obeyed. If you had any delusions about having power, I'd let them go now. Apparently, a capital pedigree is no protection here. Maybe it's even a liability. And Fulvia is kind of defensive against this, and Katniss makes a really good point. She's like, look at how they were treated. They at least, you know, if we lose, there's a chance that they can go back to the capital. Me and Gale can make it in the woods. Like, we've, you know, lived off of it our entire lives. So what about you? Where would you go? What would you do? And then she's going and talking to Gale about her prep team, and he can't believe that she's defending them, because Katniss is like, you know, they're raised on the idea of the games. They're not these horrible people that you think they are. And he asks, are you actually defending them? And she says, that stings because in fact I am, and it's ridiculous. Because they are her friends in this kind of weird way. And then she tells Gale, like, just so you know, before I was shipped back into the arena, they were crying so hard that they couldn't even really say goodbye. They could barely help take care of her, stuff like that. And so Gale isn't really, he says he's not looking for a fight, but I think a lot of the people who, Katniss has a very unique viewpoint going into the war because she has spent so much time in the capital, and for the most part, people are either capital or district, but she's had very much a taste of both. Katniss agrees to be the Mockingjay, but she also has told Coin that she needs to make an announcement in front of all of 13 that if she is the Mockingjay, then a stipulation of that is for all of the victors who have been captured in the capital to be granted immunity. And I don't know if this happens in the movie. I think it does. But Coin gets up there and she's like, okay, we're pardoning these people. Everybody's upset about it because, of course, they are. But Coin says this immunity basically only lasts as long as Katniss is, upholds her end of the bargain. So basically, if Katniss steps out of line, none of those people have immunity. And that's a pretty strong message. And also, we've heard the theory that, Snow and Coin, the reason her name is Coin is because she's just the other side of the same coin. Because when we're getting ready to shoot the propos and stuff like that, it isn't unlike her getting ready to go on stage at the Capitol. She even says, cleaning me up is just a preliminary step to determining my new look. With my acid-damaged hair, sunburned skin, and ugly scars, the prep team has to make me pretty and then damage, burn, and scar me in a more attractive way. I just love how much Suzanne Collins can imply in such a short amount of time, because it shows us that even though we're now in the rebellion and all the stuff that matters to the Capitol isn't supposed to matter to us anymore, it definitely does. Her being attractive is an important part of her being part of the rebellion, and it was an important part of her being part of the games. They do not let the tributes just go into the games. They make them pretty so that they're nice to view on screen while they're getting killed. I did feel so bad for the prep team. They were going through it, and Katniss takes them to the dining hall, and everybody hates them there because they're from the Capitol. And this is we don't see any of Gale's family in the movies. I don't think we necessarily needed to, but he has these younger siblings, and it's so upsetting. So first of all, Gale's mom is actually nice to the team, and she's like, don't worry, the food here tastes better than it looks. And then Posey, Gale's 5-year-old little baby sister, comes and pokes Octavia and is like, you're green, are you sick? And that's just the stab to the heart that was to Octavia. She's like, it's supposed to be pretty. And then Posey is like, you would be pretty in any color. And I was like, it's like a baby Peeta. That's exactly what Peeta would have said. It's just the cutest. Katniss is mad at Gale because Gale sort of is siding with Coin on the statement that Katniss has to live up to her end of the bargain for the tributes to get their immunity. And she's mad at Gale because she's like, they should get immunity anyway. Who knows what they're going through and what the Capitol's going to make them say. And later, I just think this is so funny because there are moments where it's obviously for Katniss, Peeta ends up being the right choice, but there's so many years of friendship between Gale and Katniss, and it's so easy to see all of that history in the conversations that they have. They do get mad at each other more than I remember in this book. In the movie, yes, they have their tension, but overall, the tension is more towards the romantic part of their relationship, whereas this really does focus on the friendship because Gale says, you're still angry, and Katniss says, you're still not sorry. And then Gale says, I still stand by what I said. Do you want me to lie? And then Katniss says, no, I want you to rethink it and come back with the right opinion. But she says there's no point in trying to dictate what Gale thinks, and if she's honest with herself, that's one of the reasons that she trusts him, because she really values that in another person, that they won't waver in their opinion or just become a yes man. Did we cover this in the movie? Because I can't remember. When Katniss picks up her bow that Beetee has made for her, obviously in the movie, I don't know if she could feel it moving or not, but I just absolutely love that Beetee has turned it into almost its own animated being. She picks up the bow and it quivers awake, and I think does it say hello? No, it just hums, and Beetee says that's how it's saying hello. It heard your voice. And it's cool that it recognizes her voice and stuff like that. I also greatly appreciate that Beetee turned this into a real weapon and not a prop, because that would have sucked. So we're trying to prep Katniss for the propo, which is going horribly. And Finnick is the one this time who says they'll either want to kill you, kiss you, or be you, which makes sense for his character, but it's so engraved into my brain as Effie saying it. It's actually kind of wild. It's the funniest scene in the movie when Katniss is trying to do the line, and she's like, people of Panem, we fight. And it's so horrible in the studio. And then Haymitch comes in. She is still very upset with Haymitch, by the way, for leaving Peeta in the arena. And he says, and that, my friends, is how a revolution dies. Because it's true. Anything that they're filming with Katniss just in a studio, there's no real emotion behind it. She's unfortunately just not a good actress. Like, the whole time in the Hunger Games, Peeta's almost pretty much been carrying the act for them. I forgot that Boggs was a father, so that's great. We're talking about when Katniss has made us actually feel real things before, because we need to pull from that to make the propos. And Boggs is talking about how Katniss singing to Rue is when she actually made him feel something, and then she says, somewhere in my head an image surfaces of Boggs with a young boy perched on his hip in the dining hall, I think. Maybe he's not a robot after all. And that's just really upsetting, knowing what's gonna happen. I like that Katniss and Haymitch are willing to have it out. Because for them, even though it at times it's mostly a mentor-mentee relationship, but a little parental, but also just like this deep understanding of who the other person is in their friendship. When Katniss has been pissed at Haymitch for letting Peeta be left behind in the arena, but Haymitch isn't happy with her either. And I didn't really think about it from his perspective, but Haymitch finally says, like, we need to talk, and says, we're gonna have to work together again, so go ahead, just say it. And she's like, I can't believe you didn't rescue Peeta. And he says, I know. And then she says, now you say it. And he says, I can't believe you let him out of your sight that night. And at this point, like, they both understand why the other one couldn't help Peeta, but they're still angry that they didn't do it. Because Haymitch says, like, if we had stayed to get Peeta, all of us would have died. We would have gone down in the hovercraft. It was that quick of an escape. And obviously Katniss didn't really have a choice in the arena because of the way the plan was, and she wasn't in control anymore. And so they both are angry at each other while still understanding each other, which I think is a very normal dynamic in their relationship, honestly. But I like that we had those hard conversations. Like, people don't really coddle Katniss necessarily, and she doesn't shy away from talking about stuff like that. And that's something I do really like about her character throughout the entirety of the story. But Haymitch says, you know, Peeta's not dead. And Katniss is like, we're still in the game. And then Haymitch says, still in, and I'm still your mentor. And then he says, when you're on the ground, remember I'm airborne. I'll have the better view, so do what I tell you. And she says, we'll see. And I'm like, that is the most Katniss answer I've ever heard. So Katniss she's off on some sort of a mission, and she knows that Finnick wants to come, but as far as like mental stability, Finnick is not where Katniss is yet. And so Katniss, to distract him, tells Finnick that Beetee has a trident prepared for him and special weapons. And she's like, Finnick, before you go, maybe some pants, because he's been walking around in a hospital gown the whole time. And it's so funny. He looks down at his legs as if noticing his outfit for the first time. Then he whips off his hospital gown, leaving him in just his underwear. Why do you find this? He strikes a ridiculously provocative pose, distracting. And it's so funny because, like, we don't get very much time at all with Boggs in the movie, and so watching him react to Finnick is just so funny. Katniss says, I'm only human, oh dear. And then we're talking about how Gale looks striking in the uniform, because of course we are. And then Boggs says, well, don't expect us to be too impressed. I just saw Finnick O'Dare in his underwear. And it's this comment that gets Katniss to kind of trust Boggs. I think she likes it when people are funny, or like just kind of like witty in their humor. We get just this one sentence. We're talking about how a lot of the peacekeepers are from District 2. She says, some buy into it for the honor of the thing, others take it as an alternative to punishment. For instance, join the peacekeepers and your debts are forgiven. So that's exactly what happens with Snow when he gets sent off to be a peacekeeper, because he was either going to jail or becoming a peacekeeper. Okay, so while we're on the ground, Katniss pulls out her earpiece so she doesn't have to listen to Haymitch. And when she comes back, Haymitch is like, do you see this? This is your earpiece. And he says, if you remove it from your ear, I'll have you fitted with this, and holds up some sort of metal headgear that I instantly named the head shackle. And then he says, if you disable that, I'll authorize them to put a chip inside your head so that I can always talk to you. This part is really intense. So we have another instance of Peeta talking to Caesar Flickerman. We note that he looks like he's lost weight. He looks like there's something wrong with him. And then he speaks directly to Katniss and says, ask yourself, do you really trust the people you're working with? And do you really know what's going on? And if you don't, find out. And this did not happen in the movie, because Katniss, I think she sees that in the cafeteria, but at this point she just sees it when she's with Finnick. And then we hear all these people coming to do damage control, because they're all worried that those words are going to have such an effect on on Katniss. And then Finnick just like grabs her and he's like, we didn't see it. And they both play dumb to like what just happened. Like they didn't see Peeta talking. And almost more heartbreaking than seeing Peeta is Gale not telling her. So we know that Gale saw it. Like there's a really good chance that he saw what Peeta said. And Katniss is like, he's going to tell me, like he's going to talk to me about it and tell me what went on. And he doesn't for a very long time. And I feel like that is our first, maybe not our first, it's one of our first real like concrete confirmations that Gale isn't on Katniss's side necessarily, he's on the rebellion side. Because they know it's a liability if Katniss had seen that from Peeta. And so clearly Gale is taking the whole road of, if she didn't see it, I'm not going to tell her. Like I'm not going to be the one who has to deal with this and like work around it because that could cause damage to the rebel cause. We're going to go to 12 briefly to film some stuff for the propos. And then Katniss says, at the last moment, I remember to send a message to my mother about my leaving 13 and stress that it won't be dangerous. And I think that's a huge stepping stone in the relationship for Katniss and her mother, because Katniss even says, like, she had said something earlier. Her mom had been so worried about her leaving, and she was like, well, they should have run it by you. And she's like, Katniss, nobody runs anything by me. And that includes Katniss. Like, she hasn't asked her mom for any type of permission to do anything in years, because she did have that period of time where she was the head of the family, not her mom, because her mom was incapacitated by grief for so long, and she had such a resentment about that. And now her even taking like the time to make sure that her mom knows where she is shows, I feel like, some mending in their relationship that was definitely needed considering how this book ends. So Katniss sings The Hanging Tree, and it's really interesting that we get a breakdown of the song from Katniss, especially now since reading Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, we know what the original intent was, or what rather Suzanne Collins made the original intent, because what Katniss interprets it as isn't exactly the same as what we saw unfold. She doesn't really fully catch that the dead man calling for his lover was because the Mockingjays were still carrying his scream to run, and she thinks that the dead guy is a murderer and he is calling for his love to run to him so that they could both be free in death, because at the end of the song they're wearing necklaces of rope side by side, which means that they had both died. But Katniss has a very different view on the song now that she's gone through the Hunger Games, and she says, I used to think the murderer was the creepiest guy imaginable, the guy who was hung. She says, now with a couple of trips to the Hunger Games under my belt, I decide not to judge him without knowing more details. Maybe his lover was already sentenced to death and he was trying to make it easier to let her know he'd be waiting, or maybe he thought the place he was leaving her was really worse than death. Didn't I want to kill Peeta with that syringe to save him from the Capitol? Was that really my only option? Probably not, but I couldn't think of another at the time. This is what I mean by how dark Katniss's thoughts are in this book, and we don't get to fully see it in the movies. We see panic attacks and stuff like that in the movies, but we don't hear this layer of it, and it's really intense. I read this book pretty quickly, and it's just kind of a dark place to be. Throughout the book, even though I do think that Peeta is the right choice for Katniss, obviously, there are so many times where I'm like, Katniss and Gale are truly the same person. They work so closely as a team, it's like one person. Because they're going through the woods, and I just love the way this is described. She says, we reach a boulder, and both Gale and I turn our heads in the same direction like a pair of dogs catching a scent on the wind. Because they're kind of they both automatically look at their meeting spot in the woods where they would go hunting. And I just really like the way that was described, but also emphasizes how much of a team they were for so many years, and how it's hard for Katniss to kind of be trying to parse out who Gale is now, because she's always heard him talking in the woods about all the stuff that he wishes they would do and how he wants Capitol to go down, but I think she didn't fully take him seriously up until now, seeing the way he's acting in District 13. I forgot, so when we see Peeta telling us about the fact that the bombers are coming to 13 and him being you'll be dead by morning, it's an intense scene in the movie, but I forgot, genuinely how scary it is in the book. So obviously, first of all, we see blood on the floor, which is something we don't see in the movie. And then also, we hear Snow ordering end it, which just shows the level of chaos that was happening as Beetee was putting in all these images of Katniss and stuff on the monitors. And I was so annoyed. So I really liked Plutarch's character more in the movie than I do in this book, because he just doesn't care. He is actually such a game maker, and he is very similar in that role in District 13. And he says, Katniss, obviously this is a bad moment for you, what with Peeta's setback, but you need to be aware that others will be watching you because they're about to go into lockdown for this bombing. And he's trying to explain to her, like, the way she reacts to that video that they just saw is going to really affect the way other people react, which is true. But also, it just shows, like, how little he cares and how truly calculated Plutarch is, but not in a way that's just smart, but in a way that's, like, it's smart, but it's also really cruel. Yeah, Katniss is very upset that she says, I can't believe he actually just downgraded Peeta's dire circumstances to a setback because we saw his blood all over the floor. There's a chance that he could be dead at that point, and Plutarch doesn't even give any type of condolences or ask if she's okay. Like, it's so, there were times in this where I was like, wow, he is so unfeeling as a person. It's insane. Prim goes and gets Buttercup. It is nerve-wracking every single time I read and watch that scene of, like, Katniss wedging herself in between those doors to make sure that they don't close before Gale and Prim can get in. And she tells Buttercup, I should have drowned you when I had the chance. His ear flattens and he raises a paw. I hiss before he gets a chance, which seems to annoy him a little since he considers hissing his own personal sound of contempt. I just love it. I love the character that Buttercup has because it's not like he's just a cat. It seems like he's a cat particularly bent on annoying Katniss. And she says, so even though she doesn't super like Buttercup, the entirety of District 13 does because they developed that game Crazy Cat. And she says the citizens of 13 are truly starved for entertainment because District 13 wastes nothing, but they gave Katniss an extra set of batteries to use in a flashlight to play Crazy Cat with Buttercup, which is just, like, beyond her. Like, she has no idea why they would do that except for the fact that they are so bored. And they're in that bunker for days. This also gives Katniss plenty of time to think, and she says that this is when she really realizes that the reason Snow has Peeta and won't kill him is because he's torturing Peeta specifically to get to her and to make it clear that no matter any move she makes results directly in torture for Peeta. And she says, it's under the weight of this revelation that I truly begin to break. She goes to talk to Finnick about it and she realizes that this is what they're doing with Annie to him. And she's like, oh, that's why you've been so messed up since we've gotten here. And Finnick he feels bad. He's like, I should have warned you somehow. And Katniss isn't upset with Finnick about this. Like, there's nothing he could do, really. And I was so annoyed. There were multiple times in this book where Katniss was just so annoyed with Gale. And for good reason. I was so, So she goes and she talks to Finnick. Finnick is sweet enough to give her, like, the rope so she can, tie her knots and stuff and try to preoccupy herself with this new realization that Peeta's being used against her. And then the next morning, they are breaking out the coffee because it's been such a long night for everybody. And then Gale is looking at Katniss and Finnick because Finnick puts sugar cubes in her coffee, which is the cutest because that's how they met when he was like, you want a sugar cube? And so now he does the exact same thing and it's just sweet. Like, they're friends, they're trying to comfort each other. And Gale looks at Katniss and Finnick in, like, a weird way. And Katniss even thinks, she's like, what now? Does he actually think something's going on between us? Maybe he saw me go to Finnick's last night. I guess that probably rubbed him the wrong way, me seeking out Finnick's company instead of his. Well, fine. Gale can think whatever he wants. And honestly, yeah. Like, that was so annoying. I was like, Gale, I know that your feelings are hurt, but we are in such dire circumstances, and if that is really gonna be what throws you, that is so annoying. Oh my gosh. Then she suits up to be a Mockingjay, and she's trying to film a propo, and she breaks down in the middle of it. And Finnick she can hear Finnick saying, like, she figured out how Snow is using Peeta. Katniss says, it's so sweet. Several sets of arms would embrace me, but in the end, the only person I truly want to comfort me is Haymitch because he loves Peeta too. And he's, like, comforting her and holding her while she's crying, and I'm crying. It's so upsetting. And then she says that, like, it's her fault that he's being tortured. And then they sedate her. A lot of sedation going on in this book, honestly. When she comes to, we find out that we have gone into the capital to try and, like, retrieve Peeta. Oh, it's so horrible. So Haymitch is there talking to her. Apparently Finnick kind of went to the same state of crying and being unable to record anything. And he said, you two cracked up and Boggs left to arrange the mission to get Peeta. And then Katniss is like, well, if Boggs is leading it, that's a plus. And then Haymitch tries his best to cheer Katniss up. He says, oh, he's on top of it. It was volunteer only, but he pretended not to notice me waving my hand in the air. I think he would truly do anything for Peeta. like we saw in the last book, he actually would die for Peeta. But Haymitch knows he's not meant for combat, I think. And he said, see, he's already demonstrated good judgment. And then Katniss noticed that, like, Haymitch trying to crack a joke like that is him trying to hide something. She tries to ask who went to go on that rescue mission, and Haymitch kind of dodges the question. And she asks, like, who went, and Haymitch finally says, you know who else, Katniss, you know who stepped up first. And it was Gale. This scene in the movie was done so incredibly well, where she starts losing her mind, and she's like, I'm gonna lose them both, I'm gonna lose them both. That was truly heartbreaking. So, like, this is such a dynamic scene in the movies when they're showing, you know, them going in to save Peeta and the other victors while Finnick is telling story after story about Snow, because, like, he told Katniss in the last book he got payment from people through secrets because he's like, money and jewels don't interest me, and she didn't really understand what he meant, and now she actually feels horrible because she didn't realize that President Snow had sold Finnick off since he was 14, 15 years old. And now he has all these stories and secrets about President Snow that he's just airing. And Katniss even notices, like, they're fighting against the Capitol for the airwaves, but it seems like they're putting up less of a fight because the people in the control room probably want to hear these stories about President Snow, which is, like, it's such a cool note. Like, obviously we weren't going to see from the Capitol's perspective for that, I don't think, but, like, her being able to figure that out was really interesting. We get Peeta back, and then we find out that he's been hijacked and everything is horrible, and he tries to choke Katniss. What a place to leave off the first movie, honestly. If they were gonna split it, that's the only place that it really would have worked. Plutarch is so annoying. He's like, at least he's alive. Yeah, he's alive, but he's not even the same person. Like, what are you talking about? And then he says that Snow executed Peeta's stylist and his prep team on live television tonight, which is so much darker than what we see in the Capitol in the movie. Like, obviously Snow is a horrible person, and people know that he doesn't shy away from killing off enemies and traitors and stuff like that, but, like, to show it on live television, I feel like obviously the Hunger Games is brutal and it's people killing each other, but I think it would have been out of place for the Capitol we see in the movie to have done this. So for them to be talking about it here shows, like, just the level that Snow is willing to go to show their own Capitol citizens being killed for being traitors when they literally didn't do anything except know someone. And then he says, we've no idea what happened to Effie Trinket.